Do you have a favorite time of day? I suppose that's a strange thing to contemplate, but it's something I've always wanted to ask. For me, I love sunsets, the dusk. One might think that this is an obvious answer for me. Death is the ending of life, and therefore I would love the ending of day. And yeah, I grant that's a bit ironic. It's certainly fitting. But I don't think of sunsets as an ending per se, more of a final beautiful gift. Sunsets provide the most vibrant range of colors one can imagine. Hues of orange, red, purple, and yellow that contrast against a dimming blue sky. Clouds, once a simple white glow, now give off a vibrant pink and present a canvas more beautiful than anything I've ever seen. No two sunsets are exactly the same, I've found. Different colors, textures, hues, and patterns seem to accompany each one, and depending on where I am in the world, I find more things to admire about them. The smells in the air as the night starts to arrive. The sounds of frogs, crickets, and birds singing their evening anthem. The sensation of a chill that arrives with the closure of the day. Watching a sunset always makes me think about life, and, of course, myself. It can bring back memories of times and places that I thought I'd left behind for good. And this evening, watching the sunset in particular, I remember so much. But this memory isn't very pleasant. Maybe it's the cool red of the setting sun that reminds me of it. Or maybe it's that smell of distant crops on the wind. But I do remember this. I'll never forget. My first job. My first soul. His name was Abel. Do you know the most disturbing thing about my first soul? It wasn't a natural death. Not a peaceful or accidental one either. My first soul was a homicide. And maybe that says something about humanity, but I choose not to draw quick conclusions. I remember how naive I was and how naive Abel must have been that day he followed Cain out into the field. Abel and Cain were brothers, and I hadn't had a lot of experience with either one of them. I just knew who they were. When Cain invited Abel out into his crop fields, I followed too, unsure why. I had no way of knowing what was about to happen, for I had yet to see a body cease to function, let alone at the hands of another. I remember looking on curiously as Abel admired the lush vegetation around him. But as he did, I saw Cain lift a large stone from the ground. I didn't know why he did it at the time, and I'm sure that if Abel had turned to see him stand there, with that wild and contemptuous expression, he wouldn't have known what to make of it either. And then right as Abel turned, Cain struck. I also remember that right before striking, Cain hesitated, as if he were thinking, trying to reason with himself. Maybe, I like to think, try to stop himself. But whether he tried to or not, I don't know, because he did. I watched Cain strike Abel across the head with the stone. Abel hit the ground, blood gushing from his head. But Cain didn't stop. He pounced on Abel and struck him again. Again. And again. I wanted to run over to stop it. I made a quick grab for my sword to put an end to Cain's sudden act of violence. But I stopped. I don't know if God himself stopped me, or if maybe I was too horror-struck to even move. But when Cain finally got up, staring at his brother, bloody and beaten, his body broken and moaning, that's when I approached. I knelt down beside Abel, and it was as if I knew what had to be done, as if I'd been born with the knowledge. I reached into Abel, grasping his soul, and I gently but firmly extracted it, holding it in my arm like one might hold an infant. I remember how very light it was. I found over many thousands of years that souls are heavier the more baggage they carry. The more burdens the soul bears, the harder it is to carry. Burdens like anger, resentment, depression, remorse, or greed, jealousy. I found none of these in Abel's soul. And after looking down at Abel's body, seeing it was now nothing more than a lifeless shell, I shot a glare at Cain. He saw me. I know he saw me. The look of revulsion on his face. The realization of what I was and why I was there. I'll never forget his expression. A mixture of horror, disbelief, regret. And then I drew my sword. Oh, I remember that. I was furious. I think it was the first time I'd ever been angry. And I wanted to pay him back for the crime he'd committed. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and a life for a life. I detest murder because murder is simply a human presuming to command me to take the soul of someone by their own hands. Does the murderer not realize that in time I'll claim them as well? Cain realized that. He ran. I watched him. He ran, tripping over himself to get away from me, as if terrified I would strike him down for what he'd done. And a part of me really wanted to. But I didn't. I let him run. It wasn't his time, and I had more important things to deal with. Abel's soul was still in my arms, and I doubted that he wanted me to cut down his own brother right in front of him. Then again, what do I know? Maybe Abel wanted some justice of his own, but he didn't seem like that kind of person. His soul didn't tell me that. Then I went about my job. The job that I've been doing ever since that day. I suppose you might be wondering what happened to Cain. Well, I did come for him years later. I found him sleeping on a mat, gasping for his last breath. He saw me, and I remember how relieved he looked. He wasn't afraid like the last time, but relieved. I can't blame him. His life had been very unhappy since he'd seen me last. Never being able to live in one place. He struggled to grow crops, which is what he'd done before he'd killed his brother, because the Lord had punished him severely, and he was forced to wander the world. The soil hated him and wouldn't give crops the way it used to. He couldn't be productive like he used to be. And the world hated him. Everyone who came across him, even without really knowing him, resented him. And I think it was because he'd taken a life. Humans tend to look at murderers and homicidal monsters like Cain and resent them. You don't even have to really know them. All you have to know is they committed the crime and you detest them. I can sympathize. But I took his soul and I was just as gentle with it as I was with Abel's, because I don't differentiate in how I handle souls and I don't show favoritism. That's not my job. I leave that to far wiser and higher powers than myself. But I did always wonder if he truly regretted it. I like to think he did. I think Cain regretted what he did. I think he regretted it the moment he stopped, the moment he saw what he'd done. But there was nothing he could do about it. So many of the crimes and evils done by man are done spur of the moment, done without thinking. And I think that's one of the greatest weaknesses of man. Blessed with the capacity to think, rationalize, and plan. And yet people still act spur of the moment without thinking anything through. The sun just finished setting, so the sky has only a little bit of glow left. So I feel it's time for me to move on and resume my work. The work I started so long ago in a field of crops soaked with blood. Forgive me, I know this wasn't a very pleasant entry. Perhaps, should I find myself with time and gazing at another sunset, I'll remember more pleasant memories. Sincerely, Death.